And also, I want you to know that this book you just read is actually one of the textbooks he uses for his graduate student.
Yan Ling laughed at me because I have so many sticky notes in my book and all of the notes.
Okay, please.
Oh,
the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here. I teach in the political management program at Carleton, but as Michelle said, I used to be a political staffer, and so I get to teach kind of what I used to do. Eddie Goldenberg, who wrote this book, was the senior policy advisor for Jean Chrétien before he was prime minister, and then while he was prime minister. So Goldenberg did this for a very long time. I did it for less, but hopefully can share some thoughts. So I was asked, Michelle and Yan Ling had kind of asked, about how politics works in certain respects. So I thought it was fairly useful because there's certain things about how Ottawa works, how politics works, that some things change over time. Some things will be very different now than they were when I was there, but some things will be very similar. Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. May I give just a bit of background about how I came here, just to put it in context. So I did a PhD in early modern English history. Henry VIII and his children. Well, one of the children in particular, Edward VI, that nobody's ever heard of anymore. I did a PhD in that, and I thought I would be teaching history for my life. I obviously didn't think it through very well, but that's what I expected to do. And as I was finishing my PhD, a friend of mine got hired to work for this new party that had been elected in Ottawa in 1993. It was called the Reform Party, or if you remember Preston Manning, it was the Reform Party. They had come to Ottawa, they'd been elected, 52 of them had been elected in 1993. They rode their horses from out west, they saddled up, they tied their horses outside Parliament Hill, and they realized they had no staff. None of them had been, except for one, had been elected before. They really knew nothing about what they were doing, so they needed staff. None of their staff from out west wanted to come to Ottawa, so they had to hire people. And I ended up coming to work with, my friend became the director of research for Mr. Manning as the leader of the Reform Party, and my friend brought me to work here. Neither of us had been involved in politics before. I wasn't sure it was the right thing. My wife said, "You're a historian, of course you'll take whatever job is offered to you," so I came to work here. I worked for the leader of the opposition for 7 years. I retired and didn't plan to go back into politics, but in 2006, when Stephen Harper's new Conservative Party won the election with a minority government, I thought, I'm a Conservative. This may be my only chance in my lifetime to work for a Conservative government. I better take the chance. So I quit a job teaching in order to go to work for he was the Minister of Justice at the time, Vic Taves, in a minority government. And it's like, I could lose my job like next week. But anyway, I thought I would do that. So I worked with the Minister of Justice for a year. He was shuffled to Treasury Board Secretariat. So I worked with him at Treasury Board for a year. Somebody is at ESDC. So ESDC, it was HRDC and then HRSDC before that. I worked for Minister Solberg and Minister Finley there. You can tell the theme is that I don't stay in one place very long because things may catch up to you. So it's always good to move quickly. And then I had the opportunity to work for Prime Minister Harper as his Director of Policy for about 2.5 years. And I retired from there to go to Carleton to teach in the political management program. So that's kind of an overview of my background. I've worked in opposition. I've worked in government with different ministers and with the Prime Minister. And so, yeah, that's my context. And as I say, it's a privilege to teach the kind of things I used to do, because there's stuff on the inside that you don't necessarily see from the outside. One of the things that I talk to my class about is to start kind of with first principles is we well, actually, even just before that, like it's been since we first talked about coming here, I think there's been a lot that's happened. When was that? It was November, maybe?
When did that idea first come out? Like to invite Paul?
Yeah, that was like November, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So since then, let's see, what's happened? The Minister of Finance resigned.
Yes.
Talking about, we shouldn't be doing political, basically political gimmicks.
Gimmicks.
Yeah. It's like, well, those are the gimmicks that you've actually been supporting for the last few months. But anyway, so Chrystia Freeland resigns as the Minister of Finance. The Prime Minister Trudeau he first sought a prorogation of Parliament, so the House of Commons didn't come back. He announced his intention to resign, which triggered a Liberal Party leadership process, which Mark Carney won as Liberal leader, and when he became Liberal leader, he automatically became Prime Minister. So we have a Prime Minister who's not been elected at that point. So we have an unelected Prime Minister who brings in a new cabinet. The President of the United States basically launched a trade war and an annexationist rhetoric. We have a general election in which not only does the incumbent Prime Minister, because he'd been in Prime Minister for 2 weeks, get reelected, the leader of the opposition loses his seat. The third party gets, almost
Diminished.
Diminished is a good word. That's a polite, neutral word. So there's a lot going on, there's a lot going on. But things like prorogation. One of the reasons the government would have prorogued, like if Mark Carney didn't bring the House back, he sought a general election immediately. One of the reasons was the government hadn't passed a budget. So if the House of Commons had come back in late March as scheduled, the government almost certainly would have gone bankrupt. It's not supposed to happen in a Westminster system, but because they hadn't passed a budget, the main estimates, like the new fiscal year starts April the 1st, if the government hadn't passed the estimates, which is Parliament giving them the money, they wouldn't have had money. If they call an election, the Governor General can sign stuff to give the money. Governor General special warrants. So a general election kept the government solvent for until they could bring the House back. But coming to first principles, because I teach the executive and how the executive works, and we're talking about prime ministers and how people get to be prime minister and prorogation, and I've mentioned the Governor General. One of the important questions in Canada is, where does the government get its power? Where does the government get its power? Where does power come from in Canada? Where does power come from in Canada? Anybody?
Stephen Harper said the people are never wrong.
The people are never wrong.
Yeah, the elected prime minister, party leader always say that we have got the mandate from the people.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure he agreed with that after the 2011 election, but no, the 2015 election, but anyway. Okay, so is that where power comes from in Canada?
I Googled it, sorry.
Because it comes from there in the United States. What is the Declaration of Independence in the United States talks about, or the Declaration of Independence, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, to do a bunch of things that I can't remember because it's so long since I watched Saturday morning American cartoons where they had all this stuff. We the people, in the United States, power comes from the people. But in Canada, it doesn't.
We're royalists.
In Canada, power comes from the Crown.
Yeah.
So if you read the Constitution, it talks about the Crown does this, the Crown does that. Power, executive authority is and continues to be vested in the Crown, according to the Constitution Act. So we have this, but we do not expect King Charles Oh, he's coming in a few weeks, right? So it ties right in. He's opening Parliament on May the 27th. We do not expect King Charles to start making decisions about taxation or about foreign policy. If power comes from the crown, why is it that the king doesn't do all that stuff? Well, we're a democracy. So how do we square the fact that we're a democracy with the fact that power comes from the crown? That's a key issue in Canadian politics. And there's an old story that I don't know, not everybody knows nowadays. Has anybody heard of Robert Baldwin and Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine? Probably not. Baldwin and Lafontaine were politicians before Confederation. They were actually the two. One was from basically Ontario. It wasn't called Ontario then, from Canada West, and one was from Canada East. They were together the Reform Party of the time. So this is in the 1840s. And Baldwin and LaFontaine get elected in January 1848. So they're the government. They have a policy that they want to do. Earlier on, in the 1830s, there had been rebellions in Canada. There had been rebellions in Toronto, which was called York at the time, and rebellions in Quebec. And there was a lot of property damage. So in 1848, Baldwin and LaFontaine's government says, we want to pass a bill called the Rebellion Losses Bill, so that business owners and people who had had property damaged in the rebellions of 1837 would be compensated by the government. Well, this was highly controversial because the Tories, the Royalists, especially in Quebec, in Montreal, they said the people who lost property, they were traitors. They were supporting the rebels. We should be hanging them. We shouldn't be giving them money. But it was the government's policy, and they passed through the legislature the Rebellion Losses Bill. There's a governor, the British governor, Lord Elgin. He was named after the hotel downtown. No, wait, the hotel was named after Lord Elgin. And Lord Elgin, the bill gets passed through the legislature, and the bill goes to Lord Elgin. And for it to be law, the governor had to sign the bill. Well, everybody thought Lord Elgin is not going to sign this bill, right? These are traitors. We're not going. But Lord Elgin said, this has been passed by the elected legislature, and so as the Governor General, I'm going to sign it, because it's not about what I think, it's about did it go through the legislature. And so that was the birth of what we call responsible government in Canada. Something happened in Nova Scotia at the same time, but we don't talk about Nova Scotia. So the idea that the crown has the power, but they only exercise the power on the advice of the elected government. So how does the government get chosen? Well, it's Baldwin and LaFontaine. They were heading up the party that had the most seats in the legislature. So you have, in an election, we elect members of parliament, and they sit in the House of Commons. And out of those members of parliament, we choose the executive. We call the government the cabinet, and the cabinet exercises almost all of the power of the crown. So all those powers that the Constitution says belong to the crown, effectively they are exercised by the cabinet, by the prime minister and the ministers who are appointed, with few exceptions. Now the Constitution says on the advice of the council, the Governor General, will do this. So it's always depicted as advice. The government gives advice to the Governor General, but the Governor General doesn't have discretion to say no, right? You would be very surprised if King Charles says, well, you gave me this speech to read, Prime Minister Carney, but I'm not reading it. Actually, I've got my own speech, I'm going to read my own. So the crown does what they're told. So the cabinet exercises the power of the crown. I think that's a pretty important point. So the cabinet, they exercise the power of the crown, but they have they have democratic legitimacy because they have been drawn from the House of Commons. Now, in the case of Prime Minister Carney, up until 2 weeks ago, right, he wasn't elected, but because he was the head of he was the head of the party that commanded the majority in the House of Commons. So the fact that he was the head of the Liberal Party allowed him to become the Prime Minister, even though he was not elected himself. But there's no rule that says this. It's not written down. But the convention, the understanding would be that he really needs to get elected as soon as possible. So, he could have gone on for a little while, but it would not be, you would not expect him to be Prime Minister without getting elected for very long. So you really have these different, you have the democratic legitimacy comes from election to the House of Commons. The power rests with the Crown, and the cabinet, the Prime Minister and the ministers, are in the middle. And there was a writer in the 19th century, the 1800s, Bagot, that talked about the cabinet as being, it's like the hinge. It buckles the democratic authority of the House of Commons with the constitutional authority of the Crown, and it brings those together. Yes, we have a student who has a question. Yes.
Very good. I read something, but then I still cannot remember, cannot really differentiate the thing. And now it's actually a good case for you to really let us know. Okay, right now, Pierre Poilievre, he lost his own seat. So he's still the leader of the Conservative Party, but he cannot be the official, what is that called?
Leader of the opposition.
Leader of the official opposition. And for Carney, before that, he was the leader of the Liberal Party. He was also the Prime Minister. How do we square those two different things?
So, Prime Minister is an executive office.
Executive office.
It is about leading the cabinet, and I'm sorry if I'm throwing. I'm starting to walk around.
No worry.
So he doesn't require a seat in the House of Commons legally to be the Prime Minister. You can have other ministers who are not in the House of Commons. A long time ago, when Eddie Goldenberg was there, there were two people who were appointed to cabinet: Stéphane Dion and Pierre Pettigrew.
Yeah.
So they were politicians. They were from Quebec. They were not elected, but Prime Minister Chrétien put them into the cabinet. And then they got elected. They got elected soon after that, but they were in the cabinet first. So there was no requirement that they be a cabinet or they be elected in order to be in cabinet. But it's understood that you will do it fairly soon. When Prime Minister Harper was elected in 2006, the Conservatives had very few seats in Quebec. And he needed some Quebec ministers. So one thing he did, there had been a Conservative candidate in Montreal named Michael Fortier. And he had been involved with the party. He was a lawyer from Montreal. He had run, but he had lost. Prime Minister Harper appointed Fortier to the Senate. And then, as soon as he appointed him to the Senate, he appointed him to cabinet. And for the next 4 years, actually not 2 years, 2.5 years, Fortier was a minister, but he was not elected. He was in the Senate. That used to be more common, that you'd have senators that were in cabinet. Prime Minister Trudeau II, Justin Trudeau, did not have any senators in his cabinet, and we'll see what Mr. Carney does. We may never have a senator in cabinet again, but it was allowed. So those are examples of ministers who were not elected, but it's very much the exception. You expect ministers to be in the House of Commons, but those offices are executive offices. The leader of the opposition is a parliamentary office. It's not executive. It is totally about the House of Commons. So if you're not sitting in the House of Commons, if you don't have a seat, you can't be the leader of the opposition in the House of Commons because you're not there. He can still be the leader of the Conservative Party, but for the moment, the Conservatives have appointed Andrew Scheer, who's a Conservative MP from Saskatchewan and a former leader of the party, and a former Speaker of the House of Commons, which I find a bit odd. Speakers are supposed to be nonpartisan. I think I don't know. I think it's a bit undignified for a former speaker to go into politics. It would be almost as bad as a former governor of the Bank of Canada going into politics. These are supposed to be politically neutral jobs, but anyhow. So Andrew Scheer is elected, so he will be acting as the leader of the opposition until Pierre Poilievre gets elected in a by-election. The Prime Minister has the prerogative to call a by-election. I mean, the Prime Minister has the prerogative to recommend to the Governor General when the by-election should be called. Of course, recommend, right? It's just a direction. And he doesn't have to do that for 6 months. But Mr. Carney has said that he is going to do it on an expedited basis. So that's a courtesy that he doesn't have to give to Mr. Poilievre, but I think it's a good sign that he is. There isn't enough courtesy in politics nowadays. So I think that would be it's a gesture of good faith from the Prime Minister to call the by-election fairly quickly. Whether, a gesture, a magnanimous gesture like that would be reciprocated the other way around, I don't know. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much for the clear clarification, like how the MPs and how the minister and prime minister work. So for passing a budget, do they need actual vote from all the MPs, or do we just need a vote from the ministers? My understanding will be from the MPs. So for example, the ministers who are not MP, they will be put into a very awkward situation. They cannot even vote for the budget their government is presenting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I mean, to vote on anything in the House of Commons, you have to be an MP.
Yeah.
And so if there are any ministers who are not MPs, and that may not be the case, right? Prime Minister Trudeau, I don't think he had any ministers that were not MPs. Stephen Harper had two, Michael Fortier for a while, and Marjorie Le Breton, who was the leader of the government in the Senate, was a minister, but she wasn't in the House of Commons. And going back, Jean Chrétien had some. Going back to Pierre Trudeau, there were more senators, because the Liberals Pierre Trudeau did not elect anybody from Western Canada, like nobody west of Winnipeg at one point. So they put some Westerners into the cabinet. But generally, yeah, so they would not be able to vote. So the budget. Do we want to talk about the budget?
Yeah.
Or we talk about the budget?
Why not?
So what is the budget? Like the finance minister stands up and gives the budget in the House of Commons. They usually wear new shoes.
Yeah.
That's a tradition.
New Balance, right? It has to be New Balance.
Does it?
That's a brand.
Oh, okay.
So I think from Paul Martin, he started like New Balance shoes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, it's a brand. It's a running.
I know it is a brand. I didn't know the finance minister had to wear New Balance. Are they made in Canada?
I don't know, but I think it's.
Somebody would ask that question.
Yeah, it's a thing
nowadays.
for them to do.
Yes.
New Balance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess you do want the New Balance budget. Maybe that's what Paul Martin was getting at. I had missed that part, so thank you, Michelle. So, the finance minister stands up and gives the budget. Is that where the government gets its money? No. The budget is basically a communications exercise. Ministers, it's written by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. Well, it's written by the Minister of Finance and the Department of Finance. They're responsible for the budget, but everything in the budget it's approved by the Prime Minister. So we used to call it a two-key system. The Finance Minister has a key, and the Prime Minister has a key, and to get something in the budget, you basically need them to agree. And sometimes they agree, and sometimes they disagree, and they have to kind of fight it out, but you know, usually if the prime minister wants, the prime minister can always get his way. Goldenberg talks a lot about that. Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, lots of story there. They have to work that out, but it's decided by the executive. It's the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister. They design the budget. Other ministers don't know what's coming in the budget until, like, you know, when Harper was Prime Minister, the budget would be tabled at 4:30 and in the House of Commons, and at 4 o'clock the ministers would go over for a cabinet meeting. It's like, okay, this is what it's going to be, right? So you run HRSDC, ESDC, like Diane Finley was the minister and Monty Solberg when I was there. They would give the finance minister ideas. The finance minister would write to ministers and say, what do you think should be in the budget? And they would say, well, finance minister, here's what I think you should, here's what I want, you know, here's what my department would like. But ministers don't know what they're going to get until they see it. So that is it's the government's fiscal plan. Here's what we're going to spend. Here's how much revenue we're expecting. Nobody raises taxes nowadays, but, you know, if there was a tax increase or a decrease, it would all be in the budget. That's the government's plan, and they tend to emphasize things that are going to be popular because it's about getting on the news. It's about using the budget as a communications document. Now that everybody does things on computers, one of the most important tools for writing a budget, Control F on your keyboard so you can search through the document. So you've got a 400-page document, so you're going to Control F youth. Are youth mentioned in the budget? Are farmers mentioned in the budget? You know, are women mentioned in the budget? You want to make sure that all of the different groups are mentioned in the budget, because if they're not, somebody's going to notice the next day. So you actually have to make sure that the budget is communicating what you want it to communicate. But that's the government's plan. It doesn't give the government any money. Even if the budget gets passed in the House of Commons, right, it doesn't give you money, because money comes to the government through what's called the main estimates, or parliamentary appropriation. So the Treasury Board Secretariat spends, you know, a lot of time pulling together massive documents of what is the government spending going to be next. Like, what do we need to run these departments next year? And that gets passed through the House of Commons in the main estimates, and that's where the government gets its money. So if you have not, if a government doesn't translate its budget into the main estimates and get it passed by the House of Commons, you don't have money to spend. And typically that's done in late March. You pass the main estimates for the first third of the year, and then you have full supply a little later. And you can come back for supplementary estimates because, of course, the stuff in the budget actually wasn't in the main estimate, so you've got to kind of add stuff in later. So that's inside, but it's really important for how things work.
Like, I'm not very sure, like, if this is the right time to ask this question. So from this book, right, even during Chrétien's time, and he is a liberal, and they emphasize on fiscal responsibility, you know, like balance the budget. But nowadays, I know Trudeau's father was a little bit
profligate. Yes.
That was a word, and I guess, you know, Justin Trudeau was even worse. And now, if you look at Carney's platform or whatever he's proposing, I think it's $100 billion, right? Deficit. It's going to be more. And I mean, like, fiscal responsibility, balance the budget, even each household is the first thing you want to be careful, right? And why right now the trend is that, like, you know, like, they don't really care about it, or what is it? Is that they want to be able to please, you know, their voters? I don't quite get it. Would you like to comment on it? Like, why the trend is going the other way? Ultimately,
because voters are prepared to be bought. It's like, look at all these promises. Oh, I'll vote for that. I'd like that. I'd like more.
Every promise
I'd like
is
more
a
OAS. I'd like more, more of this and more of this program, and lower taxes, because he's also promising to reduce taxes. I don't know how you do these things. We're doing more spending, lower taxes. It is. I mean, the United States has done this for a long time. They have massive deficits, but the United States is kind of the world's reserve currency. They can get away with stuff that other countries can't. Canada's a pretty small economy. So back in the 1990s, this is when Goldenberg was writing, and I was working for the opposition. We were there at the same time. He was in government, and I was wanting to be in government. In the 1990s, was elected as a Reform MP in '93, and he was instrumental in writing that platform. The Liberals, Jean Chrétien, they were so outraged that we would suggest balancing the budget in 3 years. Jean Chrétien said this would lead to all sorts of unrest. He said, there will be blood on the streets. He said, if you try these sorts of cuts, it's too much. And the Liberals said, we're going to have responsible spending. We're going to control the growth of debt to GDP. So it's still going to grow, but we're going to slow it. When Paul Martin, when they got into government, Paul Martin had the 94 budget, and it was sort of slowing growth, but it was very poorly received by international financial communities. There was a famous editorial in the Wall Street Journal talking about Canada basically as like the Mexican peso, and talking about Canada as almost a third world country. And the finance department convinced Paul Martin that this was not just a conservative, we like to cut. He said it was essential that the government get it, because we were spending far too much and the debt was out of control. And the ratio of debt to the size of our economy was growing. So to their great credit, as somebody who worked for the other party, right? To their great credit, Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien managed to convince the Liberal cabinet that they needed to cut. And they cut significantly. Now, one could say that a lot of the cuts were to the transfers to the provinces. That was true. But there were also significant cuts within federal operations, like the Department of Transport, I think, dropped by like 70% or something. I'm a bit rusty on the figures. So they by the time of the 97 election, they had projected we are going to be in balance this year. It's like 95. Oh, it took them basically they did it in 3 years. It's like, wow, isn't that funny? 0 and 3. But they balanced the budget under Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien. And that was very significant because, instead of being behind with the debt growing, we were now able to invest in other things. And through the under Paul Martin as Prime Minister and under Stephen Harper, we were in balance up until the fiscal crisis in 2008, 2009, when we went into deficit. But Harper did not want to be in deficit, so he spent money like the government. As on his 50th birthday, he says in cabinet, he said, if you had told me, 10 years ago that on my 50th birthday I'd be buying General Motors, I wouldn't have thought you were crazy, because the government basically bought significant shares in GM to keep it solvent. So the Conservatives went into debt, but they spent the next 4 years doing everything they could to get out of debt. So the budget was balanced by 2015 again, and Justin Trudeau in 2015 ran on a platform of significant deficit spending. And in fact, he ran, the NDP, Tom Mulcair and the NDP promised to keep a balanced budget. And Justin Trudeau said, balanced budget, I'm not doing that. And he won a massive majority. So that's, sometimes you get the government that you deserve. And people clearly were prepared to vote for that.
Yeah,
now
says the budget will balance
By
itself.
Well, he doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about monetary policy. Yeah. So those were, the government did what it said it would do, which was spend a lot of money, They actually spent significantly more than they said they would, but there was COVID, and there's always reasons. Spending money is easy because it's always popular. Cutting is very difficult because every dollar that you cut is loved by someone. No matter what the program is, big or small, there are people that really want that money and they will fight for it, and they make a lot of noise. So cutting it's a high political price to cut. Because I know I worked on some of the Harper deficit reduction exercises. We called it strategic review, which was looking at different programs and which ones we can cut. And it's easy to make a decision to cut it. And as soon as you announce it, there's just massive outrage, even very small programs. And you get a lot of political blowback. So, yeah.
Paul, I have a story. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay, no.
You had your hand up first.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
You can ask me a question any day.
True, but I also think this question might benefit people here as well. You mentioned that at the budget process, it's the other ministers provide kind of like input to the finance minister, but they have no idea knowing what their ideas will be taken care of, or if some of the ideas are taken care of, they don't know to the extent of that. Can we say that it is the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, the two of them are running the show of the budget, other than all of the other ministers?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, how they do that depends, because it's a question of how does the finance minister and the prime minister, how do they work together? Some of that's a question of style. Like Stephen Harper liked to be quite involved in decisions. Jean Chrétien, less so. I mean, he was prepared, because Jean Chrétien had been finance minister. He had been minister of industry. He had been minister of Indian affairs. Like had so many portfolios. He knew what it was like to be a minister, working for a prime minister who sometimes, was not easy to work with. And so he tended to leave ministers, like Goldenberg talks about this a lot, as long as ministers were doing their job, Chrétien tended to be, kind of hands off. At least that's how Goldenberg tells it. Oh, thank you. So he was not as involved in all of the, probably not as involved as Harper was in the minutiae of things. But, Martin couldn't do everything he wanted. Martin wanted to cut old age security. That Goldenberg tells that story. And Chrétien said, no, we're not doing that. And Martin said, well, I think we should do it. I'm going to resign if we don't do it. And they came in to they had to work that out. Eddie had to. And it's essential that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance be on the same page. So when Martin comes to Chrétien and says, we need to balance the budget and it's going to take a lot of cuts in a lot of departments, Chrétien supported him. We used to think in reform, Chrétien seemed a bit of a bumbler. He doesn't kind of talk right in either language, either official language, and a bit of a joker. Like we thought Paul Martin was the brains of the operation, and that maybe Chrétien was, just along for the ride. It's clear to me now, reading not just Goldenberg, but reading a lot of other accounts, that Chrétien was essential. I mean, it could not have happened without Chrétien because he gave Martin support. So when this came into cabinet, and Paul Martin would say, we have no money, we have to cut, and this is how much we have to cut, and I'm going to give each of you ministers an envelope, and you're going to see the amount of cut that you're going to get. In cabinet, there was massive controversy because ministers were saying, I'm a liberal. I didn't get elected to cut the immigration department. Like that was Sergio Marchi. Italian background. I said, I don't want to cut immigration and Sheila Copps. I don't want to cut heritage. And when the ministers would complain, like Martin would talk to cabinet and say, here's what we need to cut. And ministers would go, yeah. So, okay, well, this is what I'd like more spending on this. Chrétien would say, did you not hear the Minister of Finance? Right? There is no money. And then a few minutes later, somebody else would ask for more money. And Chrétien would have to again say, did you not hear me? There is no, the next minister who asks for more money, I will cut their budget by 50%. That's how he backed Martin. If they were not on the same page, it would have been very difficult. If he had said to Brian Tobin, for example, who was a Chrétien supporter, and who kind of wanted the leadership, and Chrétien, liked him a lot better than he liked Paul Martin. Brian Tobin wanted billions of dollars for rural internet. And Martin said no. Tobin went to Chrétien and said, you have to give me this money or I'm going to resign. And I'm your supporter, right? So he thought, I'm going to get what I want. And Chrétien said, no, I'm not. I'm backing the finance minister. And so Tobin resigned. He went to be Premier of Newfoundland. So that relationship is really important. And when I use this book in class to illustrate how that finance minister relationship goes, but there's other books. There's a really good book about a Saskatchewan finance minister named Janice McKinnon, and she had very similar, she was NDP working for the Premier Roy Romano, and the cabinet wasn't happy with their cuts, and so how the Minister of Finance works with the Prime Minister is essential.
So what's the rule for the Treasury Board president in the budgeting process?
It's not your turn to ask, it's her turn.
I'm just following the same topic.
Well,
No, it's still her turn to ask a question.
well, there is no rule. And that has changed since the 1970s. The Treasury Board used to be a lot more involved in throughout government operations. And it still is important. It does policy, and it compiles the estimates every year. But the estimates are a statement of, based on last year's spending across government, what would we need for next year? Okay, and so there's maybe there's more old people, so we're going to have to increase OAS, and we're going to have to do different things, but largely we're going to figure out how much money do we need from Parliament to affect last year's spending. The budget is about new things. It's about what program are we going to increase, where are we going to put extra money, or where are we going to reduce. And Treasury Board Secretariat is not really involved with that. They will be at meetings with finance, and they'll be there with a lot of these discussions, but the president of the Treasury Board is no more involved with the budget than any other minister. And maybe that should change, but that's how it's been for quite a while.
He is a consultant on certain things.
Maybe. He wasn't when I was there,
Yeah.
but...
For example, now I'm working on something for the budget.
Yeah.
So I know.
Yeah. So finance finance will work with other departments. So, because they're going to put through their analysis. So, but it's never quite sure exactly what's going to be in the budget.
Like finance account recently ask us, by the way, I work at the TBS.
Yeah.
Ask us, for this item, how much money should invest? And we gave the numbers. And how they take the numbers into their budget, we don't know. But they do request some information.
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
TBS.
But you don't know. So what finance prepares to go to the finance minister is what they call sources and uses. It's an analysis that's basically, here's all the sources of money that we've got, like revenue coming in, and here's the different uses that it could be put to. And they will have a series of what they call one-pagers. No, sorry, they call them two-pagers, but they're never actually 2 pages. They're always more than 2 pages. So here's an idea. And we've consulted with Treasury Board Secretariat. We've consulted with, the Department of Labor and maybe, the Coast Guard, whatever. They've had input into this, and this will be a proposal to do a particular thing that will go to the finance minister. But the finance minister may say no. Like, actually, I don't like that, or I want to change it. And so finance probably isn't going to tell you that. They will have gotten information from you, and you will have contributed to the analysis. But what actually the finance minister and the prime minister have decided is going to be in the budget, I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if that would be widely distributed. My sense is it's not, but maybe things have changed.
I have another question.
What's the numbers? Oh.
Robert, after you.
Yeah.
After. So Robert, your turn.
That's my turn.
Yeah,
He
okay.
actually took my turn away. Yeah, that's okay. So I think you gave us a really nice picture. So we talk about election, we talk about political power. Can you give us some demonstration between how the political power have influenced into the budget plan? So for example, the funding for First Nations, doesn't matter which kind of government they have been coming, spending a lot. We still haven't seen all season road to the North Territories. We still don't see they actually provide services like rebuilding of Canadians, to the healthcare, to the industry development, things like that. So can you give us a little bit rationale behind it? Is it due to because they have limited elected seats in the north? That's why they don't really have that power to sit into the cabinet, become a minister. We did have First Nation ministers, but they're not representing the First Nation people. So if you can expand a little bit on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so when I was there, Leona Aglukak was the Minister of Health,
Yes.
and she was from Nunavut. Ministers have input into government policy priorities, and those can be reflected in the budget. It's hard to say. Why is it that the government decides to put one thing forward and not another? It is about political support. So it's on the one hand, what are our values? What are our priorities as a government? What do we really want to do? And what is it that we think is going to gain us support? Maybe a government will do things that are unpopular. Governments sometimes do that. It's like, this is going to be unpopular, but we're doing it anyway because we think it's the right thing. But often they're going to be doing things that are going to get them support. And so they have to balance these things. I don't want to do this, but I have to because, we're going to have to invest in this building because it's going to fall down if we don't. You're probably not going to put that in the budget. In the the budget speech, but it'll be buried in the budget. We're going to have money allocated for this. Other priorities that are just good policy, that as the government we have to do these things. They may be politically neutral, right? They're not really politically winners or losers. They're just things that need to be done. Those will be in the budget. They may do things that are unpopular, but they will certainly be looking for you to use the budget to gain political support among certain groups, different demographics. Maybe it's people up north, but there aren't a lot of people, and there's not a lot of seats up north. Things that are popular in downtown Toronto are, you're going to get you a lot more political benefit. But sometimes governments do things that are unpopular. The Trudeau government brought in the carbon tax, which was popular, very popular in some places, and not very popular in others, which is why, the carbon tax on home heating fuel suddenly disappeared in December of 2023 because there were a lot of Liberal ridings in Atlantic Canada that were very upset about that. And as one of the Liberal ministers said when she was out west, said, well, maybe you should elect more Liberals if you don't want the carbon tax, on your heating fuel. Goody Hutchins was maybe more direct than she should have been when she said that. But I remember there was one instance with Stephen Harper in 2006 he had been elected. One of his campaign promises was, I will not tax income trusts. Does anybody remember income? I'm not even sure tax-wise how an income trust works. I don't know how it's structured, but it was a tax advantage. And he said it was the Liberals under Ralph Goodale, Paul Martin's finance minister, were talking about taxing income trusts, and Harper said, I will not tax income trusts. And a lot of people...
I can help.
Oh, yeah.
Way back, there is a called the capital tax for corporation only.
Yeah.
And the capital tax was went down. I think it's 2006 eventually totally. For Ontario until 2015, Ontario capital tax. So that was main reason. They are not income tax for capital tax.
Yeah.
Not for income tax itself.
Yeah.
So that was back.
So it was a favorable treatment for corporations.
No, it's a reduced burden for corporation. That was what they call.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the income trust they set up is for delivery or distributed all the profit. They have the highest bracket as person, so they are very not tax efficient if they didn't distribute it. So income tax on itself is distribute all the profit, 93%, generally speaking. So but they didn't tax on the capital tax. If you're thinking back, capital tax and income tax was two similar size of revenue for federal government.
Well, the income trust was a. I mean, Harper said, I won't tax
For
income
capital
trusts.
tax purpose.
Yeah.
At that time, capital tax is part of income tax.
Okay. And he had to change that because.
Everybody is not enough, so it was 7% slashed to 5%. So that was their target to reduce tax burden. And worldwide, capital tax was went down. All other countries already withdraw that. Canada was very behind all other G7 countries. So that's what they were trying to do. So they reduced the capital tax and eventually totally eliminate capital tax. So that's what they won the tax income trust. That's the background.
Okay.
They were asking, it's Bell. Bell was the one saying, if you do not, you still charge us capital tax, we will change to income tax format. And they said, no capital tax formally.
Okay. So on October 31st, 2006, Flaherty goes to Harper and says, we're going to have to break this promise that we'd made because it was going to be too expensive. And so Harper agrees that they broke their promise about not taxing income trusts. I mean, I'm missing some of the mechanics. You're the expert at it. But I remember getting the letters from people who were outraged. Vote against Harper because he broke his promise. But he did it because he thought for the government's finances it was the right thing to do. He broke a promise. He didn't mean to break the promise, but sometimes politicians have to make decisions that are not in their political interests because it's the right thing to do. But, I mean, more often they do things that are in their political interests, even though it may, these are difficult decisions. Okay, we're kind of all over the place. I mean, I'm enjoying it. Was Goldenberg interesting? Is there anything about that anybody wants to bring up? I mean, he's talking about opposition. He's talking about how cabinet works. He's talking about all sorts of kind of this is just my life in politics. Yeah, Michelle.
I don't know. I think I will let
Oh, sure.
else
Yeah.
ask questions. Taking turns. Was there a question? There was a question, right?
Yes. In terms of decision making on budget, I'm wondering what role the Comptroller General plays.
The Auditor General?
Yeah, Auditor General.
No role, except after the fact. So the Auditor General's role is looking backwards and saying, this is what you did and it was bad. I found all the reasons why, that you should have done something else. So when the government is thinking about the budget, I suppose they might think, well, if I do this, the Auditor General, they'll think about, we want to avoid criticism from the Auditor General, but the Auditor General would not be consulted in the budget process. they have access to cabinet documents after the fact to do reviews of, if they're doing a study of a particular thing. But it's always in the rearview mirror. It's, you implemented this policy 10 years ago. Now we're doing a study to see if we were getting good value for it and was the money being well spent. But the Auditor General would not be involved in budget decisions. Now the Auditor General has to sign off on the public accounts every year, which is a bit different. Like the budget is about where we're going to be spending. And the public accounts are like looking in the rearview mirror and saying, okay, this is what you did spend. So I mean, that's a vital role for the Auditor General after the fact to say, okay, you may have said that this was going to be the deficit and this was the amount you were going to spend, but actually, I mean, 6 months after, usually it's November when the public accounts are released. So it's like 6 months after the end of the fiscal year, it's like, actually, this is what really happened. That's very valuable.
Good question. Budget is budget. Usually, you can spend more than you plan. So what happened to those money? What's the process? This budget is not black and white. You have to follow it. Sometimes go way beyond the limit there.
So if you're spending more money,
right.
Well, where do you get the money?
Right.
So the government has to go out onto the market to float. They have to sell bonds. Are we going to be able to raise money to cover the spending that we're proposing? And there have been, Bill Morneau is a former finance minister for Prime Minister Chrétien who came to my class a couple of times, and one time he mentioned that he didn't give many details, but he did say at one point nobody would buy one of our bond issues. He said that was a problem, right? That would create a crisis. That it was a bit touch and go at one point, and finally, okay, they were, whatever was done, but that the government does have to raise money on international markets to be able to cover some of its spending, which is why when interest rates go up, why it's so having a deficit and an accumulated deficit, a debt that you have to pay, you have to service, is so lethal, because you end up paying high interest rates and then it just gets out of control, which was what happened in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, is that we had a huge debt and interest rates went up. I have a slide I show in my class. In August of 1981, I think, the prime rate was over 20%. So people were getting mortgage rate renewals in the high 20s, and the government. So it was bad for individuals, but it was also really bad for the government because they were renewing government debt at astronomical interest rates. So it took into the Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin period before they managed to deal with that. Is that?
Yeah, but that's on a yearly basis, right? Budget every year, March something. But have they had to prepare to issue the bond or something like that? Sometimes you don't have time.
I don't know. I don't know those mechanics because I've never worked in finance. It would be interesting to know. Yeah.
Like the U.S. government, right? They say in June they're going to bankrupt, something like that. So they know they need some money. Probably they had to issue some bond or something, or buy some bond more or something.
Yeah. The Minister of Foreign Affairs.
So you're approaching the issues from a really neat historical perspective.
Did I say I was a historian?
Well, that's what I mean. You're approaching it at the most recent 40 years, but then you've got centuries with your PhD of Henry VIII. And so, based on what you are seeing in the current situation, what's the next cycle? I mean, if you yourself had to kind of guess where this is all heading in terms of record spending, perhaps maybe not as bad as the late 80s or 90s, but nearly there. Interest rates that are prohibitive. You've got this trade tariff war, which is still to play out. You've got a bipolar situation where It's as if Ottawa's hand will be forced with respect to Alberta in order to maintain unity, gain more spending. You've got an enormous pressure to spend more on military, which was not what the Liberals did in the 90s. They cut military in order to pay for their social program. Like, that's not an option because of this 2% target by 2030. So when you put all that together, with your background, historical perspective, where's this heading? What's the cycle?
So just on the military, I think that's really significant that we are under pressure to spend 2% of GDP, and everybody seems to say, oh yeah, no problem. Well, that's a lot of money. We haven't been spending nearly that. There is one line in here which I happen to circle. Yanling may have noticed that, where Goldenberg's talking about Chrétien says that we're not going to spend money on the helicopters, the H-101 helicopters, and he says, well, the Army's just going to have to do without. And I said, circle Army. It's not the Army. It was, they were actually naval helicopters, but so they didn't care. Army, Navy, whatever. So they were definitely not spending on the military. It is impossible to know. I would take issue with the one comment about interest rates being prohibitive. Like, interest rates have edged up recently and then down a little bit. But in the context of the 1980s, they're not prohibitive. Sure. In fact, interest rates have been so low for the last decade, really. My wife and I bought a house in 2001, and we paid 5.99. No, actually, it was more than that the first time, and then we renewed it at 5.99, and it's been dropping since then. Like, historically, interest rates probably 4-5% is not unheard of. If you're into the teens, that's prohibitive. So I would say at the moment, the fact that we do not have really high interest rates by historical standards is a positive thing for the government. It's higher than it was, but it's still not 1980s. But as you say, there's pressures to spend on military, which we've not had before, not since the Second World War. It's really hard to know. Will Mark Carney bring a discipline to things that we haven't had? He could. His platform didn't suggest that, or he was still introducing an awful lot of spending promises. I am not confident in his idea of we're going to have sort of an operations budget and separate it from the capital investment budget. Maybe not a bad idea, except in government, of course, everything becomes an investment. And the pressure to put stuff on the investment side, it's not really, a bridge is an investment that's going to increase trade and increase tax revenue. There's other things you may call it. This is a social investment, but it's not the same thing. So I don't know. If somebody does, yeah.
Because I want an expert to answer this, and that is, I've seen this so many times. Okay, Mark Carney told people that I'm not Justin Trudeau, and it seems he was right.
I saw his socks aren't the same, so he is not Justin Trudeau.
And so basically, from the historical role of the Liberal, and he got re-elected of the Liberal. So that's from Mark Carney. But from the Pierre Poilievre, all the time, say, same cabinet, same people, and all of it. So basically, it's, even if you have a new leader, which is Mark Carney, which apparently were different from Justin Trudeau, but it's the same old Liberal. That's from Pierre Poilievre. However, from the polls, from the election results, it's kind of like Mark Carney's point was taken by the people that he's not Justin Trudeau. So my question to you is, how much the leader could change the party, or in a way, how much the leader could take the party into a different direction? Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends. How, maybe it's a personality thing. Like if a leader is aggressive and really wants change, then they have significant leverage. Like every time a government gets elected, the prime minister can pretty much say to caucus, "You got elected because of me." Right?
In this case,
And in this case, it's absolutely true.
Exactly.
And then over time, you know, the leader often can become kind of a bit of a disadvantage. So candidates, you know, don't want to be seen with the leader. But Mark Carney has saved the Liberal Party. Everybody, I think, believes that inside the Liberal Party. So he's got a lot of political capital. So what's he going to do with it? Is he going to, how much is he going to try to change things? So we will see next week when he swears in a new cabinet. I read in some newspaper heading today that said, Mark Carney and his cabinet will be sworn in next week. It's like, no, Mark Carney's already been sworn in. He's continuing as prime minister. He's not starting new. But if there are new ministers, they will need to be sworn in. Or if it's the same minister in a new portfolio, they will need to be sworn in. So we will see who shows up at Rideau Hall. How new will it be? It's a great question, and that might help to show some of the direction that he has, you know, he's planning to go in. He has, in the last couple of months, basically contradicted a whole bunch of Liberal policies from the last 10 years. You know, the Liberals, they went to the Supreme Court saying that the carbon tax was essential to save civilization, and they won kind of at the Supreme Court, and now this actually changed their mind, we're getting rid of it.
But he only got rid of
The consumer, not the
consumer,
industrial
not
one.
the industrial. But the
Yeah.
industrial carbon tax will still be part of the cost of the products, whatever it is, and the consumer will bear it.
Yes.
So it's, he didn't do anything.
Well, he did.
Well, politically he did something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Customer
So I think, I mean, he has the political capital at the moment to make significant changes. I mentioned that he had said that he was going to call a by-election quickly for Pierre Poilievre, and to me, that was a generous offer that he didn't have to make. Is that a kind of change, right? Politics has not been very generous, right? It's been pretty nasty. And is that a difference of tone? Will that continue? Who knows? But it's not only, so we have a new prime minister. We will see if we have a new cabinet, right? I mean, we don't know who's going to be sworn in. If you are looking to mollify Alberta, you know, having Stephen Guilbeault as your environment minister is probably not the way to do it. So, you know, we'll see. There's a bunch of new MPs. I actually haven't seen any analysis, and I haven't done it myself, as to how much change there is within the Liberal MPs. There's always turnover, but how much turnover this time? I know there were ministers who had said, I'm stepping down for family reasons, and then suddenly it's like when Mark Carney came along, it's like, actually my family wants me to stay. So, you know, but for MPs, if you've stepped down and the riding's already nominated somebody else, you know, it's a little trickier. Of course, the leader can still change that, but so how different will the caucus be? But one thing that is also significant is staff. So I was a staffer. Right? You didn't, if things were going well, you didn't read about me in the newspaper, as I didn't want attention. Eddie Goldenberg, he doesn't mind attention, but staff are very important for the tone of a government, and how much staff continuity will there be? Like over the course of a government's life cycle, right? Harper gets elected in 2006 and lasts until 2015. Trudeau gets elected in 2015, lasts until 2025. Like over that time, people who work on the campaign, they're maybe particularly senior people at the beginning, they work as ministerial staff for a few years, but then they kind of get better opportunities. You get tired because these are jobs that are a lot of work. So people move on, and people who take those jobs at the end of a government may not be as experienced. So how much continuity will there be? Will the Carney government bring in new senior staff, people with some personal gravitas? They've got some experience, maybe in the private sector, and we're going to go in to work for the new government, or not? Is it going to be, as the media like to say, the boys in short pants? The 23-year-olds. I just graduated, with a BA in political science, and now I'm going to go work and I'm going to boss around deputy ministers. How the political staff have changed, I think, will be significant. We probably won't really learn much about that directly, but that's significant for a government. Will they have similar people, or is it going to be new blood? That's a question I would have.
Push back a little on that. Even if it's the same set of people, like Pierre Poilievre had been saying before the election, same cabinet, same people, all of that. Even with the same set of people, can these new ones, like in this case Mark Carney, chart a new election?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it takes. Can the Prime Minister chart a new direction? The Prime Minister can do whatever he wants, but he can't do. The Prime Minister can do pretty much any one thing he wants, but he can't do everything. So it tends to be in government when the Prime Minister is looking right at an issue and is saying, I'm interested in this, the Prime Minister tends to be able to move it along. But as soon as the Prime Minister gets distracted by what's going on over here, it's like that may not still be going. So it just depends. Is the minister enthusiastic about what the Prime Minister is doing? And if the Prime Minister is looking at it, I'm going to do it, but if he's not, I may do something else. Is the minister strong enough to get the public service to run with an agenda item that they may not be enthusiastic about? Maybe that's just a conservative problem, but there were lots of issues where I have a high regard for the public servants I worked with, but they clearly didn't agree with all of our agenda. They were generally professional about moving it, but there were times when if the Prime Minister was really focused on something, it would happen, but if the Prime Minister wasn't, it might not. So there's a lot of things involved with moving things in government, and government is it's like a big cruise ship. Our boss is going on a cruise starting on Monday. So so it's like a big cruise ship. It doesn't turn quickly. It takes a lot of time and effort to make changes. Carney has a minority government, but a very stable minority government. So people are not going to be checking their watches going, well, I wonder if he's going to last out the week. So that means, longer time horizons. People recognize you're probably going to be around for a while, so you can do more things. But a lot of it is his personality. Like how good is he at marshaling his team? When you read ministers, Justin Trudeau's ministers writing about Justin Trudeau, whether it was Jody Wilson-Raybould or Bill Morneau or their other books. Those are the two that come to mind. I think I'm missing one. They were really actually not very favorable about how he worked with ministers. Like, he was great in front of the camera hugging everybody, but he didn't actually meet with them. And they felt, the ministers who've talked felt, that they were not really given much time. It could have, kind of prime minister, how good are they at working with other people and getting people to support their agenda? Or is it all the Prime Minister's office is just going to bull this through, and it depends. Carney, he comes out of the private sector, but he doesn't actually have that much private, like he's been governor of the Bank of Canada, he was, and governor of the Bank of England. He was a finance department official for a few years, not that many. Sorry? Oh, yeah. After, was that after he was in England?
After England, then he was a board of directors for Harvard University.
Yeah. Okay, Harvard University, you're probably not, worrying about how you're going to pay people. Well, actually, maybe nowadays you are, but so he those are not necessarily jobs where you have to, your force of personality is going to bring your team along. I think we'll learn a lot about who he is coming up. And I mean, personality, your ability to work with other people, that does matter. Yeah. Your ability to read a briefing note and remember stuff, because it's a huge amount of information, and keep on top of files. One assumes that he will be able to do that quite well. So I think it's optimistic, but we'll see.
I have a question about the Canadian systems. As we can see from the South, there's a saying, there's deep state, mostly is from the Wall Street, and it's a military complex. But in Canada, is that a little bit better? Like the Bay Street, like the lobbyist? I think it's a little bit different because the donation amount is much more lower than the Canadian, than the South.
It's much more zero.
Yeah. Zero?
Yeah.
Because in this book, Christian started, right?
But thinking of the richest man, Elon Musk, people used to say 1 people, 1 vote, but it turns into $1, 1 vote. But in Canada, it seems like it's better.
Yeah. Money is not really a problem in Canadian politics. I mean, so the donation, individuals can give to a political party or to candidates. It was 1,100, it's gone up, so maybe 1,500 or
$5,700.
$5,700?
$1,700 for a candidate.
Yeah.
For a campaign and for the association, electoral association.
Yeah.
So in total could be 5,100.
Yeah.
But most people don't do that.
Yeah.
Maximum is 1,000.
And that's individuals.
Individual.
What are corporations allowed to give?
No union, no corporation in Canada.
Yeah.
So
that's a huge difference.
Yeah. So question, it says 1,000 of 1,700. Was that allowed? You mean law? That's for the tax purpose, right? But you can donate as much as you want if you want tax benefit, right?
50%.
Yeah. If you forget about the tax, you can donate as much as you can. Can you? No.
No.
The maximum is 1,700 for the federal level.
So it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
You can't go over the limit.
Yeah. It's up to you whether or not you claim tax credit.
Yeah.
But my question is about the lobbyists. We can see from the South, or a lot of retired senators, they go to the Senate, the lobbyist firms. It seems in Canada it's a totally different story.
So there's a few things. One is donations. So lobbyists cannot just give money to people, right? Because there are such significant caps on individual donations, and it's prohibited to have unions and corporations giving money to political parties. So that's a huge difference. So lobbyists can't just write a check to get access. There are still lobbyists in Canada. I think lobbyists play an important role. The lobbyists that you like are called advocates. What's the difference between an advocate and a lobbyist? Well, an advocate is a lobbyist that you happen to, support their cause, because they're all lobbying, whether it's the Red Cross or, it's, Boeing or whatever, like they're the Aerospace Association, they're all lobbying. But they have to come with, basically it's their ideas. Like they're trying to convince you that this is what we want is a good thing, but they can't just buy it.
So this my question is, if some magnetic groups, they feel their interest was not represented fairly in the budget or in the agenda in the government, how can Canada do that similar job? Which functional group in Canada that play the role for the lobbyists in the States? We see you said it's advocates.
Well, there are lobbyists here.
But how about the professional societies or
Yeah, so the professional societies, associations register as lobbyists. And I retire, I can go to work for Carleton, but I'm not allowed to lobby the government at all. And there's like a 5-year ban on lobbying after you leave government. There's fine print about, it doesn't apply all the time, but if you are, if you've been a minister, you've been a staffer, you cannot lobby the government for a certain amount of time. If you are, so that's within the Conflict of Interest Act. But the lobbying commissioner is allowed to establish guidelines for lobbyists. And the guidelines are even tougher than what's in the legislation. So if you say, I'm a lobbyist, like I work for some association, a friend of mine is running for office, so I'm going to work on their election campaign. And hey, they got elected and they got appointed a minister. It's like, now I can lobby them. No, you can't, because you're their friend. You have a connection with them, and that means that you can't lobby them.
Interest.
Because it would put them in a conflict of interest because of your relationship, and therefore you're not allowed to lobby them. So the rules on lobbying are actually pretty strict, in my opinion. And they're certainly different than in the U.S., where it's all about money and buying access. That's not an issue here, in my opinion.
But in some source of political influence of the new immigrants and the refugees in Canada, people say why liberals can win this election is quite some causes because of temporary workers and the new immigrants because the more like prone to liberals.
The liberals have always,
kind of,
since the since the 1960s, the liberals have invested time and effort in building relationships with different ethnic communities. Under Stephen Harper, he did a fair bit of that and worked out fairly well in 2011. But the liberals have certainly done that. Ethnic politics is a thing. All parties are aware of that, and they're concerned about making connections with all sorts of different groups, whether it's ethnic groups or religious groups or whatever it happens to be. Parties will do what they can to get support, which is a good thing. The government can direct money and programming towards groups that it wants to support, so that's certainly done. Kenneth?
Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager Corey.
Corey, my friend Corey. Yes, I gave Corey his first job on Parliament Hill.
Ask question. So I'm very curious about what they did, their behaviors, Premier Doug Ford and Corey during the recent federal election. So what's the dynamics between the provincial politics, the federal politics, specifically in Ontario, and the Capitol Hill? Also, Corey is the president of the
Rubicon strategies.
Yeah, a very successful law-based corporation. Some of his associates are also working as a vice president in the provincial party. So, what's dynamics of what was the role they play?
Yeah. Are we recording?
Yeah.
I have no comment.
We will cut that.
Those famous last words.
We'll cut that, don't worry.
It's very frustrating to an opposition party when the government steals your best ideas.
Exactly, they copy one.
Yeah.
Why do they even do that openly?
Because if they're good ideas,
They just do
people
it.
will say, well, you know, that was a good idea, you did it, so I'll give you credit. I mean, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are realizing that, you know, yes, they forced the Liberals to do a bunch of things that were popular, and the Liberals are getting credit for them. And Mr. Singh says, well, but I was the one that made them. Yes, you were.
Too
Yeah.
late, they lost it.
It's a classic liberal strategy.
Any other questions? If there,
One question.
yeah, we have a question.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on your comment earlier about the current government being a more stable minority government compared to the Justin Trudeau government?
Not necessarily more stable than Trudeau, although he's got more seats.
168.
Yeah, so he's very close to a majority.
No, they lost one after the recount.
When?
Last week, because in
Oh,
Quebec.
they got another
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, they got recount. Like
No, they got
block.
another back from Ontario.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay,
So
168.
Yeah, it's the new math. They keep counting. So he's much closer to a majority. The NDP is no longer an official part. Although Carney may change that. He may give he may change the rules and make the NDP an official party. But he certainly it's more stable than, let's say, a Harper government, or if Poilievre had been elected. Let's use that. If Poilievre had been elected in a minority government, there's almost no way that the NDP would not have supported him. And the Bloc do what the Bloc do, which is like, well, what are you going to give me? So it would have, but the Bloc tends to be more on the left, so that would have been very difficult for Poilievre to make a minority government work. Where the Liberals, issue by issue, they should be able to get support from either the Bloc or the NDP, or on other issues, get support from the Conservatives. So we'll see how that goes. Another factor is that the NDP is almost bankrupt. Like, they have no money. They were not well prepared to fight this election, and the fact that they've now lost so many seats, they are in major financial trouble. If they bring down the government, they have no money to fight another election, and they may not. So parties have to think about that. So when Harper was in power, like around 2008, Stéphane Dion was the leader of the Liberals, and Jack Layton was the NDP leader. Dion and Layton would kind of compete to see, okay, the Conservatives are bringing in a budget, and Layton would get right out there and say, we're going to vote against the budget. And it would now force Dion to say, I don't want an election. Like, we cannot have an election. We're not prepared for an election. So do we support the government or do we not? And Dion would say, we also oppose the budget, but then the Liberal MPs wouldn't show up to vote. So the Liberals could oppose it, but yet not defeat the government because they couldn't afford to defeat the government. So if the opposition parties, like the Conservatives, of course, would be, even right now, like the leader doesn't have a seat, so they're not really ready for an election, but they would be probably a lot happier, if they had a do-over, where, the NDP and the Bloc, of course, you never know, right? They're what can they get? Do they want to force an election or do they not? I could never tell what the Bloc's calculations were. So for that reason, I think that Mr. Carney will be able to keep this minority going for some time if he wants to, and presumably he wants to. So,
well, just like an option to offer
It-
cabinet ministers to the NDP members.
I don't think he needs to do that.
By
Yeah,
that.
I don't think it's-
Yeah, I mean, Trudeau didn't offer cabinet seats to the NDP
No.
when he really needed them, and the NDP had
more
more leverage. So they negotiated the supply and confidence agreement. They basically, said, okay, we're guaranteeing we're going to support you for a certain amount of time, Leighton, or sorry, not Leighton, as Mr. Singh did not get cabinet seats out of that. The most he got was, we will consult you.
But why like Germany, so many coalition government, not in the Canada? The Europe seems more like.
Yeah, it's very common. It's very common in Europe. Governments here don't need to do it. Like David Cameron in the United Kingdom, when he was prime minister before Brexit, he negotiated an agreement with the Liberal Democrats, and he gave them a couple of cabinet seats. But that has not been done in Canada. During the First World War, there was what was called a union government, where some Liberal opposition MPs joined the Robert Borden cabinet, and it was called a union government. But I can't think of an example since then. Maybe I'm just missing it, but it's quite uncommon. And if Jagmeet Singh didn't get cabinet ministers out of his agreement, whoever ends up leading the NDP now is not going to.
I actually have two questions. The first one is with regard to, I'm very glad to see, I'm not very glad, I'm very glad to see actually in the book there is a description about how Clarity Act got launched by Jean Chrétien. And now I would like you to comment on the Premier Alberta's intention to have a referendum. And what do you think it's gonna happen? Because ideology, what do you think the risk and also the future for Canada's unity?
So Alberta, in my opinion, Alberta is trying to do what Quebec has done for 50 years. But the Quebec situation is so different. Quebec is a lot more populous. It has a lot more seats. So it has a lot more political leverage. Alberta is important economically, but geographically, Alberta would have a lot more trouble on its own than Quebec would, because Alberta doesn't have the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So that would pose a problem. But I think that Quebec, as kind of one of the founding, the Quebecers as one of the founding peoples, and Quebec is one of the original, confederation, but even prior to that, it's the core of Canadian, the Canadian project. There's an emotional, certainly in Ontario, there's an emotional connection to, we have to do what we can to keep Quebec happy, that does not get extended to Alberta. So Alberta, I think when Quebec in the 1970s was pushing towards separation, they had their first referendum in 1976. There was a lot of anxiety in Ontario about, what can we do, and how do we fix this? People just dismiss Alberta and say, oh, just stop whining, and just I think that the reaction for a lot of Canada is to try to understand Quebec, and it's just to dismiss Alberta and say you're just whining. So I think there's a cultural difference there, and I don't quite know why. Maybe it's just because I know a lot of Albertans, so I'm pretty sympathetic to their view, and I don't think that they're treated the same. Now there's a theory, and some political scientists from the University of Calgary talked about the Laurentian elite that since the very beginnings of Canada, we were really governed by the merchant class in Quebec and Ontario, and that this sort of Laurentian elite really controls the country, and it's all for their benefit. I don't know, but these grievances out west go back a long way. Alberta has grievances now, but if you go back 100 years ago, 130 years ago, the real grievance was over like the rate for shipping things by rail.
Exactly.
So there was the crow rate, was a huge grievance in Western Canada, that the amount that Western producers had to pay to ship in products and what they, so that was, the crow rate was a subsidy that was provided to kind of keep them happy. Westerners were upset at the tariffs because it made their farm equipment more expensive that they needed to buy, but it was, it was about manufacturing in Ontario and Quebec being able to ship out. So the West has always had some economic grievances, and this is just the new thing. We won't even talk about the national energy policy from the 1980s. So there's a lot of grievance that has built up. I don't know. But Alberta, I think people perceive that Alberta does not have a lot of leverage. That, oh yeah, you're going to separate? Well, basically good luck with your 5 million people, and you're landlocked, and how are you going to get your oil to market then, huh? So I think it's different. But the Quebec, the whole Quebec nationalist issue goes back a long way, and I don't know if people remember that in the 1960s there were like the Front de Libération du Québec, the FLQ, was blowing up mailboxes. Like there was violence. In fact, there was their kidnapping in the October crisis, October 1970. The FLQ kidnapped the Quebec Labor Minister and the British Trade Commissioner, and the Quebec minister was murdered. So there's been political murders in the sort of the Quebec nationalist cause. So it goes back a long way. Alberta is not nearly, like they talk about it, but it's not nearly the same weight. Yeah.
So in the book, they mentioned about the Clarity Act. So I presumably Albertans are still have to follow the same thing as well, right?
Yeah. So it's a
it's a federal.
So when I first came to Ottawa to work for the Reform Party, this was the Parti Québécois had been elected in Quebec, and they were leading up to the 1995 referendum, which they lost. Just the no won, but barely. It was very close, and that's Goldenberg talked about that. So the Preston Manning, as leader of the Reform Party, wanted to talk about the consequences of separation, and he put out a document that was 20 questions about separation. And anyway, it was Reform wanted to put this on the agenda. Stephen Harper, as a Reform MP, introduced a private member's bill, basically a pre-runner to the Clarity Act. And Reform was denounced as you're racist and you're terrible that you want to talk about this. I think it was the right thing to talk about, that if you allowed the separatists to determine the entire debate, we're going to have things our way. I don't think that was a good strategy. So for the Chrétien government, Stéphane Dion particularly, to come in, they wouldn't say that they were at all following what Reform had done, but I'm just observing that there had been that conversation. I think it was beneficial to say, okay, look, there are some rules. In the end, those rules are going to, it is law, but these things are all political. Okay. You can say that it's, you have to reach a certain threshold, but that ultimately these things have to be politically interpreted, even by the court, who do pay close attention to politics. So there's a relationship there, but I think it's a good step. Like, what is a clear question, right? Judges have to determine that, and they determine.
Would you like to read the page 46?
Would I?
Page 46.
Do I want to read page 46?
Page 46. I have to laugh when I read that, and I think that's kind of a dilemma. I want you to comment on that as well. And
You want me to read the page 46?
yes, please.
Oh, the whole page?
No, just the
It's
first.
beginning in the middle of a sentence.
Yeah.
So this is,
Is how you recruit.
okay, so this is Goldenberg making up a recruitment pitch. So this isn't, okay, this is just his, if he were recruiting candidates, he's pretending that this is what he would say. Okay. I would really like you to give up your current comfortable lifestyle for a job where you must be prepared to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, see a lot less of your family, and face intense scrutiny. Oh, it sounds like an associate dean, but wait. Face intense media scrutiny of everything you do. I can't guarantee when the election may be called, and of course, even if you win your seat, we could lose the election, and you will sit on the opposition benches for 4 years. If that's no problem for you, then you can begin your adventures by trying to get a nomination. All you have to do is find yourself a constituency you want to run in. Hope there aren't already several other potential candidates who have been signing up members for years. Find organizers to sign up thousands of instant liberals for you from some ethnic group or another riding. Make sure you have more instant liberals than the anti-abortion candidate sponsored by Campaign Life, which has no Liberal Party affiliation. Get them all to the nomination meeting, and good luck. By the way, you have a lot to contribute to Canada, and I really need you on my team. Okay, so who would want to be a candidate?
Exactly. That's like,
I don't know.
It's
You'd have to be crazy to want to be a candidate.
Yeah, there's a dilemma, right? How do you pick the brightest person and the talented to contribute for to this country? And I think this is probably why we are having this kind of a session, just to encourage people, right? Like to sacrifice some of your personal life for your own country. But how do we do that? And this is a dilemma. It has been there and will be there.
It's getting worse, not better. So he wrote this, in 2006, based on his experience, 10 years earlier. It's always been hard. My father-in-law ran for the Liberals a couple of times and lost. It's a good thing he lost, I think, for him and for the Liberals. He's not really he's not really a liberal. He's from a Dutch community, and so all his friends are liberals, but he's actually quite a conservative guy, as many Dutch are. But anyhow, it's a hard, being a member of parliament is a hard job. It depends a lot on the riding you're in. If you're in Ottawa, okay, you're kind of, you can leave the House of Commons and you can drive home. But if you're, like, I always think of one MP I knew from Fort St. John, British Columbia, like way up north. So you'd fly to Vancouver, and then you'd have to catch another kind of 3-hour flight from Vancouver north, and then you'd have to drive for a few hours. And he did that home and back every single week for years and years and years. Like, that's insane. So that's being an MP, not even fighting for the nomination, where you do have no guarantees. So it's always been rough, long hours. It's not as glamorous as some people might think it is. The doorman, the security guard who holds the door, and they don't salute, but they hold the door, and they're very respectful, and that's nice. But when you're voting in the House of Commons, it's kind of like, okay, here's how you're going to vote. You can't just decide yourself, this is what you're going to do. But politics has become coarser, meaner over the years, and MPs deal with that. In their constituency offices, you get angry people. MPs' offices often now have security, locked doors, where you have to kind of buzz in so that you can't just walk in, because there are threats, and there are people struggling with mental health challenges who make life very difficult. Threats of violence. So being an MP is not easy. And being a candidate is the first step to that. I have the utmost respect for people who are willing to put their name forward, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. I'm a behind the scenes kind of person. Like, I have opinions, but I don't want them recorded, and I don't want to be out in the public. Like, I talk behind the scenes. That's what I did as a staffer, where MPs are taking responsibility for what they do. So regardless of the party, MPs go into serving with the right ideas. And that is that they want to build a better Canada, and they want a better society. And we may disagree about how to do that. Often we disagree strongly about how to do it. But despite that, we may have different conclusions about how to get there, but I believe that pretty much all MPs, are looking for a better country, and we all have different convictions about how to get there. But it's a hard job. And I've known, so one of the stories that I do think about, how hard it is to be an MP. So I was a staffer working in opposition, and I got to attend the caucus meeting every Wednesday morning. And I would sit at the back. There were seats along the very back wall where staff would sit. And the back row of the MPs, they had a desk, but it wasn't that far away. And there was a guy named Grant McNally who was a Reform MP from British Columbia, and he would go back and forth every week. He had a son who was born with leukemia, and so his wife was at home with like 5 kids, and one of them was very sick, and he's in Ottawa. And I was sitting behind him one day, and he opens an envelope, and he pulls it out, and he unfolds this paper, and it's from his kids. And it's like, "We love you. We miss you, Daddy." Oh. And he's looking at this, and I can see him looking at it. And I'm sure he's thinking, is it worth it to be here? Because I'm giving up a lot. I'm giving up, all the things that parents would think about. And is it worth it? And I never asked him what he thought. Clearly he thought it was. He ran for re-election. I think he lost. So that's an image that I remember, because you do give up stuff to be an MP. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So in the end of February, Premier Doug Ford rushed to call the provincial election. He argued that he needed a strong mandate to deal with the trade war, even though he already had a majority there. So looking back, do you think his strategy to call the provincial election before the federal election was a
brilliant strategy for Doug Ford?
Was a success, whether or not the provincial result had an impact to the federal election?
Well, it clearly worked out well for Doug Ford. He saw the opportunity, and it's legitimate. Right? He can say, I now have a stronger mandate. It was a good decision for him. Ontario, there's a funny thing in Ontario that historically we usually have. If we have a Liberal Prime Minister, we'll have a conservative Premier, and the other way around. And so it's just one of those historical things. Like, it's not exact, but it's pretty close, going back for decades and decades and decades. I can't explain it. What it means is that the same people who vote for Mark Carney were voting for Doug Ford. Yeah. The same people who were voting for Justin Trudeau were voting for Doug Ford. The same people who voted for Mike Harris were voting for Jean Chrétien. Like, they're diametrically opposed politically, but clearly, Jean Chrétien won 100 out of 101 seats in Ontario. Mike Harris had a majority Conservative government provincially. So What is it about Ontario voters? They seem to like
Balance it out.
the balance. Now, people, I don't think a lot of people say to themselves, well, because we just elected Doug Ford, now I'm going to elect. I don't think people are quite so, intentional about it, but it seems to be how it happens. And who knows, maybe Ford thought, yeah, I just want to get ahead of that. If I can get reelected, then so much the better.
Liberal will be back.
Well, it wasn't clear when he called the election. I don't know what the federal Conservatives were in the polls when he called the election, but they just kind of kept slipping. So maybe it became clear after a while that the Liberals were likely to win federally, but maybe Ford didn't know that at the time. I don't remember. But yeah, I mean, it's a good decision for a government. If you've been in power for a few years, you're going to have to call an election at some point. So, might as well get in when you think you're in the right spot. We have these fixed election laws federally that seem to work when there's a majority government. Generally, the election is predictable, but with a minority government, it's never predictable. The government, calls it when it thinks it can. So
I think the only thing I'm thinking of politics right now is kind of funny for PPE.
For what?
Peer polio.
Yeah.
Just
I'd never heard that before. I thought it was personal protective equipment. So.
just in case if he lost again in the second round of by-election, what would happen?
If he loses in the by-election in Wild Rose,
yes,
he's really
then the space aliens will have come. There is no way that a conservative can lose in that riding. He could try to lose and he couldn't. So I mean it is. I think was it Wild Rose?
78 or 83.
It was. I thought it was Wild Rose, wasn't it? Is that the riding that the person second down?
If his riding and other people strongly support independence, separation. So what will be his position? Now he's running there, support Alberta independence, then as a leader of federal conservative party, so that's no way. But
well, he'll find a way around that. He'll say, yeah, I'm not getting involved in provincial issues. Did you look up the riding?
Yeah, it's a long name. It's
very long.
It's
River something like that.
But it's not wild.
Not Wild Rose. Okay.
But however, you're right.
Well, it's in Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if he managed to lose that, like that would. I mean, it's inconceivable.
Here we go. So my very last question. So Australia recently had the election and the same result as Canada.
Yeah.
So it looks like very interesting. So is that coincidence or it's a trend for many Western countries?
I don't know. The Australian Labor Party the Australian Labor Party spells Labor without a U. I've never understood that. Yeah, so Labor gets re-elected in Australia. The Labor Party gets elected in the United Kingdom. The Liberals get re-elected in Canada. Everywhere else in the world, there seems to be, sort of right-wing, gains being made, but that's not happening within the Anglo sphere. Where are we in New Zealand? I don't know. I'm always a bit sheepish about New Zealand. Not sure about that. I'm not sure who's in power, but certainly, yeah. Britain, Australia, Canada. There's been no right-wing takeover. Do we have the name of the riding?
Yeah, Battle River Crowfoot.
Oh, Battle River Crowfoot. Okay. The old Battle River Crowfoot.
The Damien Kurek.
Yeah,
Damien Kurek.
Okay, I know the name, but I don't know him. Yeah.
He's very heroic, right? For doing such thing like that, to save the party, to sacrifice himself.
Probably forced to do that.
What do you say?
Well, you can't be forced to do it. You can be encouraged to do it. But you have to be careful that you don't make it known. So I chose to resign just out of the goodness of my heart. I was not offered I was not offered an inducement to resign. No, I was not offered anything. The fact that you get something afterwards, oh, you appointed me to the Senate, which he can't do.
Yeah.
But, it's like, well, just, what a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting anything. Because if you say, that I'll resign if you give me something, then like that's called an inducement, and that could actually become investigated by the police. So it used to be in politics that, like Eddie talked about that. Oh yeah, somebody did something and we appointed him to the Senate and it was all good.
Ambassador.
But nowadays you have to be a lot more careful about that. All these ethics rules, they're so inconvenient.
That guy could be the next ambassador to the UN or United States if PP becomes the prime minister.
Yeah. Well, maybe the Alberta government will appoint him to be an ambassador. So, yeah.
When they actually separate.
Republic of Alberta.
When they actually. So I guess you will enjoy some tea. And then we'll have, this is a precious opportunity to have such a wonderful expert to come to our classroom, our office, and to give such a wonderful lecture and insightful explanation. I was just going to ask you, have you covered those 3 questions? I think kind of, right? Like the difference between the House of Commons and the government?
Well, you said Senate. The House of Commons and Senate.
Yeah,
we haven't talked about the Senate.
Yeah, would you like to elaborate on that? Because I thought it's important for us to understand.
Yeah, okay. Well, so Canada has, the Canadian Parliament there's 3 parts of Parliament, just like in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, there's the King, the Lords, and the Commons. We don't have a House of Lords. We do have the Crown. We have the Senate. So the Senate and the House of Commons are the 2 chambers of Parliament, and of course the King is considered part of Parliament. So for something to become a law, it has to pass the House of Commons, then it has to pass the Senate, and then it has to be signed usually by the Governor General on behalf of the monarch. So the Senate is, since Confederation was the upper chamber, it was designed to be a chamber of sober second thought. Because senators are not elected, they were appointed for life initially, and then that became age 75. They are not subject to the political, whims of the moment. They were closely associated with political parties for a long time, so parties would appoint their own people as senators. Justin Trudeau stopped appointing political people. He appointed, sort of neutral experts. So they weren't partisan in the sense that they were actually, they were practicing liberals, but he appointed people that totally thought like he did. So, that was his prerogative as prime minister. If the Conservatives had been elected, they would have had a major problem dealing with the Senate. So Senate, because the Senate would be ideologically very much in tune with the Liberals, but they are not officially liberal. So senators they're not called members of Parliament. We use the term members of Parliament for the members of Parliament in the House of Commons, but they are part of the Senate, which is a chamber of Parliament. So they have staff, but not very many. The senators do not have ridings because they're not elected. They do have kind of, Senate districts. I represent such and such, but they don't really. They just choose one randomly. They're not really, they don't really represent an area because they're not elected. So they won't represent anybody. That's not a criticism. That's how it's designed. Budget matters have to come from the House of Commons. So the Senate cannot initiate legislation to spend money. That has to come from the House of Commons. That goes back to, the Middle Ages in Britain. But a senator can introduce legislation on anything else. So sometimes a bill that becomes a law, a bill will initiate in the House of Commons. Usually it does, but it could start in the Senate. So that's the difference between the House of Commons and the Senate, but they're legislative, they're not executive. And we talked about the difference between, the House of Commons and the executive. The same thing for the Senate. It's not part of the executive, except to the extent that the Senate is sort of the chamber of. In Britain, it's the chamber of the aristocracy, because if you were an aristocrat, a lord, you would sit in the Commons. In the House of Lords, and the king could go into the House of Lords. There was a king named Charles. It was Charles I, not Charles III. Charles I was upset with some MPs in 1642, and he took his guards into the House of Commons to look for these knights, and they skedaddled out the back. But it became one of the things that led to the English Civil War and led to Charles I losing his head, literally. He was executed by Oliver Cromwell and the parliamentary forces. So since that time, the king will never go into the House of Commons. And in Canada, the color of the House of Commons is green. The color of the Senate is red, because that's more of the royal color. And the representative, so the Governor General will go into the Senate to deliver the throne speech, not to the Commons.
Wow.
And there's an interesting little ceremony that when they're going to do a throne speech and the Governor General is about to give the speech, they will send the Usher of the Black Rod, which is an old office from the United Kingdom. It's like an official in the Senate. So the Black Rod proceeds, like marches out of the Senate, down the corridor to the House of Commons, and bangs on the door. And the House, to summon the House of Commons to come to listen to the throne speech. And the House of Commons slam the door in his face to send the signal that we don't have to listen to you. We're independent. We have our own rules and we don't have to follow the royal summons, but then they do, and they all rush to get their seats. Well, actually, they're not seats. They have to stand to listen to the throne speech. So they all run to get a good spot to sit. So that's the Senate and the House of Commons have different traditions.
Wow. So what about the Prime Minister will take their chair
So the Prime Minister
when they leave?
would take their chair? Wait, sorry.
Yeah, because that's what.
Justin.
That was the tradition, right?
Oh, literally take their chair.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought we were going for a seat in to listen
Sorry.
to the throne speech.
No, sorry. Sorry, I'm
yeah.
jumping the topic. Sorry.
Yeah, well, yes, I guess that's afforded to, I'm not sure if it's just the Prime Minister, but yeah.
Just like the finance minister to buy new shoes, pay new shoes for
New Balance.
for the budget. Yeah.
Doesn't everybody want a House of Commons seat at home? I mean,
Yeah.
it's all the style, I think.
Oh, okay. So when the Governor General delivered the speech from the throne, right? And then after that, is there any other more ceremonial kind of a tradition?
There's probably alcohol somewhere in there. I mean, they have a reception afterwards at Rideau Hall. I don't know. I've never been involved. I never got invited.
Oh.
Yeah.
No wonder we were not involved
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
How many senators normally?
105 sticks in my mind.
Okay, I'll check.
Please, you can check it. It's just like my students. They always Google and check it. So, Professor, you were wrong. I think it's 105. I
So
could be
the
wrong.
number always fixed. If a senator retire, and then it will replace that.
So the Constitution sets out the number of Senate seats.
105.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel relieved. So Prince Edward Island gets Commons than they have in the Senate, so they get 4 seats in the House of Commons. So that's set in the Constitution. So it's a bit of a grievance for some provinces because they get, like the ones out west don't have as much representation. And as provinces grow in population, the Senate seats don't get adjusted. House of Commons seats do get adjusted, but the Senate is fixed. So,
24 Ontario, 24 Quebec, and 6 each for Western provinces.
Yeah. But what do the Atlantic provinces have?
Altogether, like 10 for NS and NV, and 4 for PEI. So I guess maybe 5 for each. Nova Scotia and.
Is it 10 each
No.
or total?
Total.
Okay.
Sorry,
And
no, 10 each.
yeah, that sounds
10
more like
each,
it.
not
Yeah.
total.
So Alberta gets 6. New Brunswick gets 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
wonder.
So this is part of that resentment that institutions are stacked against them. Right or wrong, people perceive that. Yeah. So that's the Senate. Yeah. Yeah.
Did we, I think you wanna, let me go back to the questions you would like to cover. Oh, that's partly to get to the Prime Minister, I think.
I think we've talked about.
Yeah,
I think we've talked about all that.
Yeah, we talked about all that. Why don't we open the floors for everyone just to have a chit chat, and we'll make sure you enjoy the tea before you leave.
I'm looking forward to enjoying the tea.
Eileen, and also on behalf of our book club, this is actually the tea set we purchased for you.
What?
Yes. And so after you enjoy this wonderful tea, and you will take that home, and I hope next time when you enjoy your tea, you will remember us.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to join you, and thank you. That's.
We really put on the show for you. And actually, while Eileen is preparing for the tea, I have a question. I think it's a very serious question. How do you think the government...
It's Commons than they have in the Senate, so they get 4 seats in the House of Commons. So that's set in the Constitution. So it's a bit of a grievance for some provinces because they get, like the ones out west don't have as much representation. And as provinces grow in population, the Senate seats don't get adjusted. House of Commons seats do get adjusted, but the Senate is fixed. So, yeah.
24 Ontario, 24 Quebec, and 6 each for Western provinces.
Yeah. Yeah. But what do the Atlantic provinces have?
Altogether, like 10 for NS and NV, and 4 for PEI. So I guess maybe 5 for each. Nova Scotia and.
Is it 10 each?
No.
Or total?
Total.
Okay.
Sorry, no, 10 each.
Yeah, that sounds more
10
like
each,
it.
not
Yeah.
total.
So Alberta gets 6. New Brunswick gets 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
wonder.
So this is part of that resentment that institutions are stacked against them. Right or wrong, people perceive that. Yeah. So that's the Senate. Yeah. Yeah.
Did we, I think you wanna, let me go back to the questions you would like to cover. Oh, that's partly to get to the Prime Minister, I think.
I think we've talked about.
Yeah,
I think we've talked about all that.
Yeah, we talked about all that. Why don't we open the floors for everyone just to have a chit chat, and we'll make sure you enjoy the tea before you leave.
I'm looking forward to enjoying the tea.
Eileen, and also on behalf of our book club, this is actually the tea set we purchased for you.
What?
Yes. And so after you enjoy this wonderful tea, and you will take that home, and I hope next time when you enjoy your tea, you will remember us.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to join you, and thank you. That's.
We really put on the show for you. And actually, while Eileen is preparing for the tea, I have a question. I think it's a very serious question. How do you think the government politics? Because right now, I think, now we can see, politics is very important for any country.
Is it really up to the government to encourage people? Like, shouldn't people,
Okay, so I guess let me rephrase the question. What shall we do as an individual, as a citizen, to encourage the younger generation to be more actively participating in politics? Or ourselves?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it would be a good idea.
Would you encourage your daughters and sons or granddaughters and grandsons to be in politics?
To be in politics?
Yes.
Not a chance.
Why?
No, it's. I mean, if you feel, a burning to want to represent, then by all means, it's an honorable, noble calling to pursue to do what you can. But it's a hard life. It's a hard life if you've got young kids, if you've got a family. Depending on where you are geographically. So I would want people to know what they were getting into. But if somebody was committed, I have a young friend who actually has a young child who would like to be an MP, and so I said, well, you should know what you're getting into. I think he does. So. Okay, well, here's how you might go about it. You need to work for the riding association. You need to, build up. I mean, you have to work. You have to show up to things and meet people. It doesn't just happen automatically. So, yeah, I mean, it's great if somebody wants to do that, but you have to have a calling for it.
Yeah.
I think.
I guess it's very hard to have a calling for it, and it has to. The individual has to be motivated.
Well, and there are 300 it's just gone up. 338 plus, I'm not sure how many we have now. 343. Okay. Across the country, that's not that many. Not very many people can be an MP. But there's lots of ways to get involved in politics, not just by running. If you're around Ottawa, you can work as a staffer. That's an option. You can volunteer with your member of parliament. You can work at a constituency office. You can get involved in the mechanics of a riding association. Like that's what I recommended to my friend was, okay, this is if you really want to be an MP someday, you should get involved with your riding association. And every time there's an event, you should show up. And every time they call for people to knock on doors and do signs and whatever, like you should, drop flyers, you should show up. So there's lots of ways to get involved. But if you feel that politics is
dirty.
Is dirty, yes. That's exactly the word. I was gonna say grubby, but that's dirty. If you feel that, then you're probably not gonna get involved. And I think many young people get involved in politics in other ways through like advocacy organizations and NGOs and protesting with whatever. Like those are valid expressions of political interest. There's political involvement, but it's not building up the electoral side. So yeah, I do worry that maybe people aren't. They're doing politics through other ways. Or I'm just going to tweet.
Yeah.
I'm involved in politics because I like to tweet. Yeah, maybe not.
Well, thank you so much. And I guess if there are no more questions, and we will just relax and enjoy the tea. And thank you very much for spending such time with us. And as a last thought, do you have any question for us? As a teacher, I know that there shouldn't be an exam, but is there any question?
Well, what is the rebellion losses bill again? Who was Robert Baldwin? Yeah.
Perfect. So I will take over for this part. So first of all, Michelle chose a wonderful present for Paul because the reason is Paul wants to try some green tea. And the best container for the green tea is either glasses or actually white porcelains. So what actually Michelle chosen is a very typical Chinese style called blue and white. And the blue and white is a great representation of international trade started before the Yuan Dynasty because all these dying color come from Middle East. actually work with very good of the Gaoling in the Jiangxi province that produce the best porcelains, which became a huge trademark for China in every royal family's palace and high-class lord's family. So this will be belong to you after the tea ceremony. So I'm just going to use a cup for today. So what we're going to have today is actually a type of green tea from the high mountain tea. So high mountain tea means the tea should be actually growing leaves 5,000 meters or higher. And the one I choose is actually before the first spring rain. The reason is these tea leaves are very precious because the raindrops are not actually diluting its taste. So based on the portion you're having, so we're going to have a little bit, and whoever want to try, feel free to bring your little glass, which I think is perfect for having green tea. Then the first thing to do is actually warming up your cup. So in that way, your cup is ready to actually serve the tea leaves. So I have a little tray here. So this is a very special kind of the
Tea serving tray?
Tea serving tray because it has like a water.
I told you she's an expert.
Yeah.
So the teacups is either on your left side, then you're going to use this one to scoop out. This will be a good portion of tea leaves. And smell it. And smell it. So for green tea, it's not necessary to wash the tea because you're actually washing the flavor off. And you don't want to go for hot boiled water as well. Usually 80 degrees to 90 degrees is the best. That's why we take the time to warm up the cups and then making sure if the tea has been stored for a long time, all the tea leaves are loose. I will give you more. Now we're putting this one into your mug. So it looks like still a little bit more. Do you usually drink very strong tea or lighter tea? You may actually build a habit of drinking green tea. Green tea is particularly good for late mornings and early afternoon, which is working very well with your digesting system. So 1, 2, 3. There's some little tips here. It's very funny because when you drink loose tea, sometimes people use that as a fortune telling. Because how the green tea leaves are standing before the general go to the wall, they actually will look at that and say, today's not the best day. Yeah. Let's wait a little bit for the next time. So this actually did sit for about 2 or 3 minutes and you can enjoy it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wow. Would you like me to read your benefits of green tea?
Yeah. Green tea.
Yes.
And then this is a bag for you to take away if you like it. I also give you a special one. It's a custom order. So there's not much, but this is actually a portion to serve about 6 people. So if you're just enjoy it here yourself, making sure you divide it into 6 portions. If you have a family of 3, then you can enjoy it twice.
Thank you.
So the benefits of green tea: improve brain function.
I need that.
Yeah. Second, these are all well documented. Okay. 2, fat burning and metabolism boost. 3, heart health. 4, cancer prevention. And 5,
I wish I'd known about this earlier.
Okay, so Hailin, would you tell Paul when the tea will ready? Hailin is actually kind of a half amateur fortune teller, so she will tell you like.
I don't have my tarot card with me. So actually, I think it's pretty good because you can see all the tea leaves are united together, just like Paul is here to tell us everyone has a Chinese heritage, how we have been moving to Canada, how the political world work. I think this is a really important part of us to understanding the country we're in and to be part of it. Really appreciate this. And this is a tradition. Whenever we have a guest come over, we always offer the tea. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I think it's ready. Mm-hmm.
So everyone, whoever wants to try the tea.
Yeah.
Oh, I can smell it.
Okay, just come over, just grab some tea for yourself.
Yeah.
And Enjoy it.
Enjoy it.
Enjoy it. Enjoy it.
Enjoy it. It's a little bit.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.